The restaurant was loud in the way expensive places often are. Soft music, quiet laughter, the clink of glasses pretending to be calm luxury. Seagal sat near the corner, dressed simply, trying his best to stay unnoticed. No bodyguards, no spotlight. Just a man enjoying a quiet evening in public. But calm never lasts long when ego walks into the room. Across the floor, a large, aggressive man, clearly drunk on attention, was already causing discomfort. His voice carried. His laughs were forced. He wanted eyes on him, and eventually, his eyes landed on Stephen. At first, it was subtle, a stare that lingered too long, a smirk, a whispered comment to his friends. Stephen ignored it. Years of discipline had taught him when silence was stronger than reaction. But the bully wanted more. He stepped closer, leaning into Stephen's space, mocking his age, his posture, his calmness. A few people noticed, some froze. Others looked away, hoping it wouldn't escalate. Then it happened. Without warning, the bully raised his hand and slapped Steven Seagal across the face. The sound cut through the restaurant like a gunshot. Everything stopped. Forks paused midair. Conversations died instantly. Every eye turned toward Stephen, expecting rage, retaliation, something. But Stephen didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He didn't strike back. He simply turned his head slowly and looked toward his son. That was the moment no one understood yet. The bully laughed, mistaking silence for fear. He puffed out his chest, enjoying the power he thought he had just proven. In his mind, he had embarrassed a washed-up actor in front of everyone. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that this slap had already triggered consequences far beyond fists or force. Because real power doesn't always stand up immediately, sometimes. It waits. And the bully had no idea who he had just crossed. The seconds after the slap felt longer than they should have. Steven Seagal remained seated, his expression unreadable. No anger, no shock. Just a calm stillness that felt almost unsettling. People whispered to one another, confused by what they were seeing. Why wasn't he reacting? The bully took Stephen's silence as confirmation of victory. He scoffed loudly, turning to the room as if expecting applause. Instead, he got discomfort, uneasy glances, phones slowly coming out of pockets. Stephen gently adjusted his jacket and glanced again at his son. His son didn't rush forward. He didn't look panicked. He didn't even look angry. He looked prepared. That alone should have been a warning. The bully leaned in again, mocking Stephen for taking it like a statue. His words grew harsher, his confidence growing with every second that passed without resistance. Still, nothing. Stephen's calm wasn't weakness, it was restraint. People in the restaurant began to feel it, that heavy silence. The kind that makes your instincts whisper. Something isn't right here. Before we go further, tell me, what city and country are you watching this from? And honestly, think about this for a second. If I were standing in that restaurant, watching a man slap someone in public, and seeing the victim remain completely calm, I know exactly what I'd be thinking. This isn't over. This kind of silence doesn't come from fear. It comes from someone who knows the situation is already handled. Now you tell me, if you were in my place, what would you be thinking right there? Back in the room, the bully misread everything. He mistook control for surrender. Stephen finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Not an insult, not a threat, just a simple sentence that cut deeper than shouting ever could. You're done. The bully laughed again. Big mistake. That was when Stephen's son finally shifted his stance, just slightly, no dramatic move, no words. But his posture changed in a way that people who understand authority immediately recognize. A server quietly stepped away toward the back. Someone near the entrance checked their phone nervously. The bully kept talking, unaware that the room had already turned against him. The energy had shifted. The attention was no longer on his dominance. It was on his impending downfall. Stephen never raised his hands. He didn't need to. Because real power doesn't announce itself, and the bully was about to learn that the hardest way possible. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected. After the slap, there was no retaliation, no raised voice, no clenched fists. Steven Seagal remained still, his expression unreadable. That silence seemed to confuse the bully at first. He shifted his weight, laughed awkwardly, then mistook calm for weakness. "So that's it?" The bully scoffed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "I thought you were supposed to be tough." A few people gasped. Others instinctively pulled out their phones. The bully took a step closer, invading Stephen's space, puffing his chest as if daring him to respond. Stephen didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the man directly. Instead, his eyes drifted briefly to his son, who stood a few feet away, quiet, composed, watching everything with unsettling calm. The bully noticed the glance and smirked. "What's that?" he said, pointing toward the young man. "You need backup now." Laughter rippled from one or two uncomfortable onlookers. Most stayed silent, sensing that the situation had crossed into something darker. The bully fed off the attention. He leaned in again, voice dripping with mockery. "I knew it. All talk, no bite." Stephen finally spoke, but his voice was low and even. "You've said enough." Instead of backing off, the bully took that as encouragement. "Or what?" he snapped. "You gonna lecture me? Call security? Come on, do something." The crowd held its breath. Every instinct screamed that this was about to explode. But Stephen did something unexpected. He took a small step back. Not in retreat, but in restraint. It was the kind of movement only people with absolute self-control could make. The bully laughed again, louder this time. "That's what I thought." Behind Stephen, his son shifted slightly, not forward, not aggressively, just enough to be noticed. His posture was relaxed, shoulders back, hands visible. There was no fear in his face, only focus. He scanned the room once, taking in exits, cameras, and the growing number of phones pointed their way. The bully kept talking, words tumbling out faster now, more reckless. "You think people still care who you are? This isn't the movies." Stephen turned his head slightly, not toward the bully, but toward his son again. It was a subtle look, brief, almost imperceptible. But it carried weight. The son met his gaze and gave the smallest nod. Whatever that exchange meant, it wasn't meant for the bully. At that moment, the energy in the room changed. A woman near the entrance whispered to her friend, "Why isn't anyone stopping this?" Another man murmured, "Because something's off. You feel it?" The bully felt it too, though he didn't understand it. His confidence wavered for half a second. He glanced around, noticing how quiet it had become. No cheers, no encouragement, just lenses and eyes, watching, waiting, treeing to regain control. The bully sneered. "What, you got nothing to say now?" Stephen finally faced him fully. His expression wasn't angry. If anything, it was disappointed. "You're making a mistake," he said calmly. That should have been the end of it. A warning delivered without threat. But the bully, driven by ego and adrenaline, pushed once more. Big words for a guy who won't even defend himself. Anyone watching closely would have noticed it. The way his jaw set, the way his attention sharpened. Still, he didn't move. Phones were everywhere now. A low hum of whispers spread through the crowd. People sensed they were witnessing something pivotal, though they couldn't yet explain why. Stephen didn't respond again. He simply stood there, unmoved, as if the insults were passing through him. That silence, steady, deliberate, did more than any shout ever could. It made the bully look smaller, louder, more desperate. For the first time, doubt flickered across the bully's face. He glanced at Stephen's son again, then back at Stephen. Something about the way they carried themselves. No panic, no rush. Began to unsettle him. Unaware of what was coming, the bully took one last verbal swing, trying to save face. "This is it, this is all you've got," Stephen answered quietly with finality. This is all you needed." And in that moment, as the room fell completely silent, it became clear to everyone watching, the bully thought he was in control. But the real power hadn't moved yet. At first, no one noticed the young man standing just a few feet behind Seagal. That was the strange part. In a room full of raised voices, recording phones, and restless energy, he stood perfectly still. Hands relaxed at his sides, posture straight, eyes calm. He hadn't reacted to the slap. Not with anger, not with panic, not even with surprise. And that calmness didn't fit the moment. The bully, still riding the adrenaline of public dominance, laughed loudly as if the silence itself belonged to him. He paced in front of Stephen, chest puffed out, soaking in the attention. To him, the story was already written, an older man embarrassed, a crowd entertained, an ego fed. But the crowd was starting to look elsewhere. Someone whispered, "Who's that guy with him?" Another voice murmured, "Is that his son?" The camera angles shifted. Phones that were once locked on the bully slowly tilted toward the quiet figure standing behind Stephen. There was something unsettling about how composed he looked, like someone who knew exactly how this would end. The bully noticed the change in attention and smirked. He turned his head slightly, eyes landing on the young man for the first time. "And who are you supposed to be?" He scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "His bodyguard, his kid?" The son didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, just one step, but it was enough to change the air in the room. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just deliberately. Stephen glanced at him for the first time since the incident. There was no fear in Stephen's eyes, no urgency. Just a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, as if to say, "It's your call." The son met his father's eyes briefly, then turned back to the bully. Still calm, still silent. That silence began to work against the bully. "You got something to say?" The bully pressed, his voice louder now, edged with irritation. "Or are you just gonna stand there pretending you're important?" A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. The confidence that once fueled the bully now felt forced, too loud, too desperate. The son finally spoke, but not to the bully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. No threats, no insults, just a phone. He glanced at the screen, tapped once, and then looked up, not at the bully, but at the surrounding crowd. "Can someone please make sure this stays recorded?" he said calmly. The room shifted. The bully froze for half a second, then laughed again. But this time the sound didn't land the same way. "Recorded for what?" he mocked. "You planning to cry about it later?" The son didn't smile. "That slap," he replied evenly, "just changed a few things." A woman near the back swallowed hard. A man lowered his phone slightly, then raised it again, adjusting focus. People weren't watching a confrontation anymore. They were watching a turning point. The bully scoffed. "You think I'm scared of you?" The son finally looked directly at him. Not with hatred, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Certainty. "I don't need you to be scared," he said. "I just need you to understand what you've done." For the first time, the bully hesitated. "What does that even mean?" he snapped. The son took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the bully instinctively shift his weight backward. "You saw a man standing quietly," the son continued. "You assumed weakness. You assumed there would be no consequences." He paused. "That's usually how people make their worst mistakes." The bully opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Around them, the crowd was silent now. No laughter, no whispers. Just phones recording and eyes locked on the unfolding moment. Stephen remained in the background, hands at his sides, expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. Because suddenly, everyone could feel it. This wasn't about strength anymore. This was about leverage, and whatever the son held, whatever authority, influence, or power he carried, it was invisible, controlled, and already in motion. The bully glanced around, sensing the shift but not fully understanding it. His earlier confidence felt out of place now, like a costume worn too long. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he muttered, more to reassure himself than anyone else. The son nodded slightly. "That's true," he said. "And neither did you." The words landed heavier than any slap ever could, and in that moment, the crowd realized something chillingly clear. The incident hadn't ended when Seagal was struck. It had only just begun. The shift didn't happen with a shout or a threat. It happened quietly. So quietly that most people missed it at first. Seagal's son, who had been standing just a step behind him the entire time, finally moved. Not forward in anger. Not with clenched fists. Just one calm step to the side, enough to be fully visible to everyone watching. His posture didn't change. His expression didn't harden, but something about the way he carried himself made the air feel heavier, as if the situation had crossed an invisible line. The bully laughed again, loud and careless, still riding the false confidence that came from thinking he was in control. He glanced at the son and scoffed, dismissing him with a wave of the hand. "Stay out of this," the bully muttered. "This doesn't concern you." The son didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out his phone. That single motion did more to change the room than any punch ever could. He tapped the screen once, then twice, as if he had rehearsed this moment. Not because he expected trouble, but because he understood how the world really worked. Around them, a few people leaned in, sensing that something important was unfolding. The laughter faded. The whispers stopped. The son spoke at last, his voice steady and controlled. "This won't take long," he said. "But you should probably stop talking." The bully smirked. "Or what?" he snapped. The son didn't answer him directly. Instead, he turned the phone slightly, just enough for the bully, and only the bully, to see what was on the screen. A name. A title. A verified contact. Then another. And another message. "Calls already logged." The bully's smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. But the edge was gone from his voice now. The son lifted his eyes. "It means," he said evenly, "that this situation is no longer in your hands." Steven Seagal remained silent, his face unreadable. He didn't look at the bully. He didn't look at the crowd. His attention stayed on his son, not with concern, but with quiet trust, as if he had known all along that this was never going to be about strength or retaliation. The son continued, still calm. "You slapped my father in public," he said. "That's already on video. Multiple angles, multiple witnesses. And now, it's documented." The bully swallowed for the first time since this began. He looked around. Not at the crowd, but at the exits. What are you trying to say?" he muttered. "I'm saying," the son replied, "that you made a decision without knowing who you were standing in front of." The weight of those words settled slowly like a door closing. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Do you know who his son is?" Another voice followed, lower and sharper. "Yeah, he's not just Steven Seagal's kid." The bully's breathing changed shorter, faster. The son took a small step closer. Not threatening, not aggressive. Just close enough to be heard clearly. "I don't need to touch you," he said. "I don't need to raise my voice. Everything that needs to happen next will happen on its own." As if on cue, a ripple moved through the crowd. Phones buzzed. Notifications lit up screens. A few people glanced down, then back up, eyes widening. Whatever had just been set in motion was already spreading beyond this space. The bully's shoulders slumped slightly, his confidence drained away in real time. "Look," he said, suddenly softer. "This got out of hand." Steven Seagal finally spoke. One sentence, low, calm, controlled. "It didn't get out of hand," he said. "You put it there." The words landed harder than any slap. The son didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply slipped his phone back into his pocket, as if the matter was already decided. The crowd understood now. This wasn't about celebrity. It wasn't about martial arts. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about leverage. About knowing when not to react and when to let reality do the work for you. The bully took a step back, then another. His voice cracked as he tried one last time to regain control. "Let's just forget this," he said. The son met his eyes. "That won't be up to you." And in that moment, everyone watching realized the truth. The slap had been loud, public, humiliating. But the response was silent, precise, and unstoppable. The moment, everything clicked. It happened fast. 1 second, the bully was still standing there with that smug, careless posture. The kind that comes from believing you've already won. The next, his confidence drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. His eyes locked onto Steven Seagal's son, not because the young man said anything loud, but because of the quiet authority in the way he held himself. People often misunderstand power. They think it always arrives with noise, threats, or raised voices. But real power, it walks in calmly and lets the room adjust itself. The bully took a step back without realizing it. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened. For the first time since the slap, uncertainty replaced arrogance. That's when the shift became obvious to everyone watching. Two uniformed officers approached from the far end of the space. Not rushing, not aggressive, but purposeful. The kind of approach that signals this situation is already under control. One of them nodded subtly towards Stephen's son before turning his attention to the bully. "Sir," the officer said evenly. "We need to talk." The bully laughed nervously, waving a hand as if this were all a misunderstanding. "Come on, man. It was nothing. Just a joke." No one laughed. Steven Seagal remained silent, his expression unchanged. He didn't point fingers. He didn't demand justice. He simply stood there, watching the consequences unfold on their own. His son, meanwhile, spoke quietly to another official. No theatrics, no explanations shouted for the crowd. Just a few measured words, delivered calmly. That was all it took. The bully's posture collapsed in real time. His chest, once puffed out, caved inward. His hands began to fidget. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the dozens of phones recording every second. The same crowd he tried to impress was now watching him unravel. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice noticeably softer. The officer didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. "You've been identified," he said, "and there are witnesses." That word, witnesses, hit harder than any slap ever could. The bully swallowed hard. "Look, I didn't know who he was," he said quickly, nodding toward Stephen. "If I knew." Stephen finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "That's the problem," he said. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The silence that followed was heavy. The bully opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Stephen's son, then back at the officers. The realization settled in fully now. This wasn't about fame, ego, or proving dominance. This was about accountability. His earlier aggression now looked pathetic under the weight of consequence. The officers asked him to step aside. This time he complied immediately. As he moved, his head dropped, not in defiance, but in regret. And that regret was real. You could see it in the way his eyes avoided the cameras, in the way his voice cracked when he muttered apologies that no one rushed to accept. He wasn't sorry because he'd been caught. He was sorry because he finally understood how badly he'd misjudged the situation. Stephen didn't interrupt, he didn't lecture. He simply watched. Sometimes the strongest response is restraint. If I were that bully standing there in front of everyone, realizing I had crossed a line I could never uncross, I know exactly what I'd be thinking. I let my ego speak before my brain. I thought strength meant dominance. Now I see it means control. Honestly, if you were in his place, what would be going through your mind right now? The crowd slowly began to disperse, not because they were bored, but because the lesson had already landed. There was nothing left to prove. Steven Seagal turned to his son and gave him a small nod. No words were needed. The message had been delivered perfectly, without violence, without shouting, without revenge. The bully was escorted away, no longer the center of attention he had desperately tried to become. Instead, he was a walking example of what happens when arrogance meets reality. As Stephen and his son walked off together, people whispered, not about the slap, but about the composure. That's real power, someone said quietly. And for once, everyone agreed. The incident had gone completely viral. Within hours, clips of the confrontations were circulating across every social media platform. Millions of viewers were discussing the moment when the bully had slapped Steven Seagal in public, completely unaware that the real power was quietly observing, waiting to intervene. The world watched, captivated not just by the slap, but by the calm and strategic restraint displayed by Seagal and the sudden decisive action of his son. As the video spread, people began analyzing every second. Comments flooded in, some praising Seagal for his composure, others stunned by how the bully's arrogance had backfired so spectacularly. Everyone seemed to agree on one thing. Power isn't always about reaction. Sometimes it's about patience and knowing the right moment to act. The crowd that had witnessed the incident in person also shared their first-hand accounts, describing how the bully's initial confidence crumbled instantly when the son stepped in. It was a lesson in humility that no amount of ego or aggression could override. Meanwhile, authorities who had arrived later confirmed the consequences for the bully. Whether it was a legal reprimand, a warning, or just public shaming, the bully was forced to confront the reality of underestimating someone. The satisfaction wasn't in vengeance, but in seeing justice and calm strategy triumph. People couldn't stop discussing the son's role, the way he had silently observed, analyzed the situation, and then used the exact right measure of influence to neutralize the threat. That subtle display of authority had completely shifted the dynamics of the situation, leaving the bully embarrassed, regretful, and fully aware that he had miscalculated. What struck everyone most was Seagal's unwavering calm. He didn't gloat, he didn't escalate, and he didn't humiliate. He simply let the events unfold, trusting the skill and judgment of his son to handle the situation. That silence, which at first seemed passive, turned out to be the most powerful move of all. It reinforced a universal truth: patience, strategy, and understanding true power often speak louder than immediate reactions. Now, as the story reached millions, viewers began reflecting on their own lives. How often had they reacted impulsively or underestimated someone based on appearances? How often had patience and careful observation been the better path? The incident became a symbol, not just of authority, but of respect, timing, and wisdom. If you believe that real power doesn't always shout, that patience and strategy can overcome arrogance, then smash that like button. In the comments, write your response, share your thoughts, share your story, and inspire others to think before reacting. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life moments where restraint, skill, and unexpected power change everything. Because sometimes, the quietest people hold the loudest influence, and the smallest actions can teach the biggest lessons.